Hey, well, it's Huck. And I know it has been an awfully long time since I've posted a video. And, a lot has happened in this last month or so that I would like to talk about, on a personal side, health wise and otherwise, including one particularly significant purchase that I just recently made, which I'd like to talk about today. But as you know, I have spent probably the vast majority of my time talking with you on my videos this last year, about my personal situation, in particular about my health, and I often wish that I had taken more time to talk about some of the things that are disturbing that are going on, in our politics today with this completely unfit person running our country. And it's not just him. As was proven here in the past week with his acquittal by the Republican Senate, he's only able to get away with the things that he's doing in both from a behavioral standpoint and a policy standpoint because of the Republicans that are elected that are enabling him. And I have been really frustrated by the fact that we haven't for some time, reacted strongly enough, in numbers enough, that matter. I was really encouraged, I think, immediately after the election, when the Women's March, the weekend of the inauguration, unfolded. And I thought, that was a very encouraging sign that maybe America was waking up. But since that time, so much has happened that I don't know if it's fatigue, burnout, from just the sheer volume of outrageous, behavior from this president. But this acquittal of his impeachment articles by the Republican Senate, in a lot of circles, including most of the Democrats in our House and Senate now, everywhere you look, everybody is blaming it on fear. Republicans were afraid. I don't know. They're not very specific about this, but I assume what they mean by that is they were afraid of, what Donald Trump would do, or afraid of what what their voters back home, who are all big, Trump supporters, would do in the next election. Now, I can certainly understand, the concern about, doing something that's unpopular, and how, voters may react to that. I can understand that. However, what I can't understand is if you're elected, you're supposed to be a leader, and you're supposed to, you're supposed to do what's right. Most of the moderate Republicans have long been purged from the Republican Party. What remains are people that have largely gotten elected because Republicans have broken every rule for quite a long time now on how to get power and how to stay in power. And they've broken those rules and those laws by doing things like gerrymandering districts so that Republicans, win in House districts where ordinarily the vote would be close or they would lose. And bunching all of the opposition into a few designated districts that are overwhelmingly, Democratic, and so you have a huge majority in House districts, but it doesn't work that way in the Senate, and in that respect, they've taken other steps. They've had these absurd voter ID laws. They have the big thing now in the last two election cycles, the last two presidential election cycles, is purging the voter rolls, purging the registration rolls of large numbers of urban voters, on the pretext that these people no longer live in the district, based on the assumption that they have moved, out of the district. They no longer live in the places where they, gave as their address when they registered. And the few studies that have been done on this have shown that as many as 40% of the voters that they purge from voter rolls are in fact still living in the district and still eligible to vote, or should be. And we're not talking about, a few dozen voters here and there. We're talking about huge numbers, mostly urban, mostly people of color, where, in districts like in Ohio, where, 20 or 30,000 votes can mean the difference between somebody being elected or not, even statewide. You purged 200,000, or as in Wisconsin, 300,000 voters from the rolls. You've gone a pretty long way towards assuring yourself of being reelected without fear of what the opposition is doing. The Republicans have a very sordid, history of rigging elections, cheating elections, whether it's the voter purges or whether it's the ID laws or whether it's the gerrymandering or whether it's eliminating precincts in places that are largely urban. So instead of having, we've seen the 8-hour lines in Florida, for instance, and portions of Broward County and Miami-Dade County, where people finally, give up. Many of them have jobs, they've got to go to work or whatever. They can't stand in line all day, for their chance to vote. You don't see people waiting in lines in urban or in rural districts or in Republican suburbs. You only see these precincts removed, in these difficulties. I think Kansas, famously in 2016, eliminated the one precinct in, I think it was Dodge City, Kansas, which was the largest, community or city, if you will, town, in several miles. And they moved the one voter precinct out of Dodge City altogether and put it out of town. Where, in other words, making it more difficult, making it more time consuming for people that largely vote Democrat to vote. And many people are reluctant to vote anyway. We historically have one of the world's worst, voter turnouts among, democratic countries. And so it doesn't take a lot to discourage, a lot of folks from voting. Just make it a little bit more difficult. Make it a little bit, take a little bit more time. You make it take a lot more time or have to travel a much greater distance. It becomes, too big of a hurdle for most people to overcome. It creates, in fact, a real hardship for some voters. So Republicans have done this for a very, very long time. And they're very good at, creating ways to interfere with elections or to cheat to win re-election. And we haven't even talked about some of the other dirty tricks that they pull. I know it's been brought up here that in the Iowa caucuses that were held the other night, one of the difficulties that happened was all over Republican operative websites, if you will, they were publicizing, the phone number that was being used to phone in those results of these caucuses once their phone app or whatever failed to work properly. And these Republicans, if you will, websites were encouraging people to jam the phone lines. This isn't the first time that's happened. In a lot of urban districts where we have Democrat volunteers who will, drive senior citizens or college students, other people that don't necessarily have a way to get to the polls. They have set up like hotlines or whatever for people to call, and someone will show up and drive you, to the polls and make sure that you get a chance to vote. It's it's documented that in many of these cities, Republicans have jammed those phone lines, robocalls to tie up those lines so that people, when they would try to call for a ride, they couldn't get through. So when was the last time you saw any Republican show remorse for any of these tactics that they use, election after election, voter ID laws? No, they come up with all kinds of excuses why this is needed for voter fraud, they will claim. Gerrymandering, they will get, in some cases, they have been remanded by, even their state Supreme Court to redraw the maps because it was drawn so, so unfairly, so racist, to give themselves an advantage. And yet they come back with a redrawn map that's just as, just as racist and unfair as the original. And we've seen this over and over and over again. Until I think it was the state of Pennsylvania where the Supreme Court finally had to draw a map of their own and said, here, use this. Because you obviously aren't able to do it on your own in a fair or impartial manner. And I'm not saying that Democrats never do any of these things to any degree, but Republicans have made it, a part and parcel of how they win power and how they hold on to power. And once they do hold power, like I say, they will ruthlessly wield that power in complete ignorance of whatever rules or norms or laws are supposed to regulate them. We know what Mitch McConnell has done. Mitch McConnell is at least as evil as Donald Trump, and at least as responsible for the situation where we find ourselves now. Trump could not do any of the things that he's doing if not, enabled by Republicans in the Senate. And that has been, proven over and over again, and emphatically so with this recent acquittal in the impeachment process. And so I have been looking at all of these recent, commentaries by, some Republicans apparently off the record, but mostly Democrats, who have all attributed to this vote by the Republican Senate to acquit Donald Trump. Basically, 52 of 53 Republican senators refused to hold Donald Trump accountable for his abuse of power in this Ukraine scandal in the first article of impeachment. And all 53 of them refused to hold him accountable for his absolute refusal to cooperate with Congress's rightful task of investigating this. The White House absolutely refused to turn over any documents, any records of that they had. They admonished basically all federal workers not to cooperate, not to testify, not turn over any records themselves. So whether it would be, the Secretary of State's records or any of their employees, Defense Department, intelligence agencies, none of them. They were all banned by presidential edict, not to cooperate in any way, And, this is clearly obstruction of Congress and their constitutional right. But all 53 senators, including Mitt Romney, refused to hold Trump accountable for that. And everybody's been basically attributing it to this fear that they have. And I say bullshit on that. It wasn't fear. It was, this is what Republicans do. This is how they take power. This is how they hold on to power. And they show no remorse for it whatsoever. And you could tell that from the pitiful excuse for a defense that they put on against these charges, because they had no defense. They basically were, they were basically left to plead that, hey, a president can do whatever the hell he wants to do. So, I think the biggest disappointment that I, am experiencing is the fact that more Americans are not, completely up in arms over this. I know Indivisible and other, progressive groups around the country held some rallies. I think they were supposed to have 270 cities were supposed to hold a, response to this acquittal. And I know some cities like New York and, some of the bigger cities, had a fairly decent turnout, I guess. But they should have all been much larger. I know I drove down, my health being what it is, I wasn't able to go out and march myself. But I did drive down to downtown Youngstown, which was the nearest rally to where I live, about 7 or 8 miles away. And I wanted to drive by and honk my horn and, show at least some solidarity with these folks. And I was disappointed with the sparse turnout. And this isn't the first time that I've gone to a, local indivisible rally of sorts and been kind of disappointed in the, in the lack of a greater turnout. And, and I kept thinking, well, 2-3 blocks from where they were having this rally in downtown Youngstown is Youngstown State University. I mean, we're literally 2-3 blocks away. If we're going to win an election in 2020, if we're going to retake the Senate and win the White House, we're probably going to require a candidate who can inspire people. We don't do well when we run candidates who don't have an inspiring message. We tend to do really well when we have somebody that can rouse a crowd, and in particular, rouse young people. And I kept thinking, why don't we have more outreach into Youngstown State University? I mean, there are, thousands of students that live right there on campus, right, downtown Youngstown. And somebody, should be taking this message of resistance, to that campus. Maybe somebody on campus should be trying to inspire some kind of movement there. And that alone should have bolstered the numbers of people downtown Youngstown the other day. So I was, frankly, I've been very disappointed in, our reaction to what, outrageous, things we have seen from the Republican Party over the years. And we probably should have really started this march on Washington in really big numbers. The moment Mitch McConnell refused to hold hearings or vote for Obama's appointment to the Supreme Court of Merrick Garland, that was probably the first really over-the-top decision that should have given us an indication clearly just what the Republican Party thinks of rules and norms and the fair execution of democratic governance. And the fact that we didn't show more outrage at that, I think is in part why we find ourselves where we are today. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I wanted to get that off my chest. And I will be posting more. And by the way, I told you at the beginning that there have been, that I did make a fairly significant purchase in my personal life here, and that is that I did get a portable oxygen concentrator. I wasn't able to buy a new one. To buy the warranty that they require. I mean, they won't service these things unless you have a warranty. And the warranties are like ridiculous, $500 for a year. Anyway, I bought a used model, and I bought a part for it that was required. And seems like every year you have to buy something, particular part for this thing, or on the average about once a year, and the part's only about $70. So, but at any rate, so I was able to come in just a little bit under budget, and I got a very good Inogen G3, and it now works perfectly. Very low hours on this thing. Very low hours on this thing. It's practically brand new. It's a little over a year old, almost a year and a half old, but it was almost never used. And the thing is, whether you use it or not, there are certain maintenance things that you have to be aware of. And so I've educated myself on these to the extent that I've been able to. And I think I've got a really good deal. And at any rate, that wouldn't have been possible without just the unbelievable generous support that I've received. You know who you are. And I don't know. The words just aren't adequate to express my thanks. I've just been very, very fortunate. And this is going to be, for me, a very significant change in that I'm going to be able to do a little bit more. I'm going to be able to do some things I haven't been able to do in the past, hopefully. And I'm going to be able to leave the house overnight if I ever want to do that, for one thing. Maybe visit some folks and not have to worry about, do I have enough, this, like I say, this is going to change, some of the decision-making that I've had to, some of the restrictions I've had to live under. So again, I'm very appreciative. You have no idea. Anyway, that's it for now. I thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I will get something up here a lot sooner than a month from now. Thank you for watching again, and we'll see you again real soon.